Beware, citizen, you are now departing from the world of allowable opinion. The Tom Woods Show.
Welcome, everybody. It's Tuesday, August 26th, 2014. It's 10th or Tuesday once again with Michael Bolden, founder and executive director of the 10th Amendment Center. Check them out at 10thamendmentcenter.com. I've invited Michael on today because I want to talk about the new handbook he's produced for the Off Now campaign. The handbook is called Off Now, How Your State Can Help Support the Fourth Amendment. You can get that handbook for free at offnow.org/handbook. Michael Bolden, welcome back for another 10th or Tuesday.
Tom, good day to you, sir. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I was just telling you about the executive producer of that Broadway show that promotes Sound Money. I had him on yesterday, and I didn't think to call it Iceland Monday. You know, I mean, we got the 10th or Tuesday coming up, and doggone it, you know, now that's gone forever. I've lost that opportunity forever, unless I can get more people from Iceland on the show. But we've got 10th or Tuesday for today, and today we're going to talk specifically about this handbook that you've produced over at offnow.org, which is a project that the 10th Amendment Center is promoting, but with many other organizations. And your handbook is all about doing what?
Well, if things go real well, we might just have to start doing Water Wednesday, because the goal is to turn off natural resources and even electricity to federal agencies like the NSA who engage in mass warrantless surveillance. People have been waiting on Congress. They'll say, oh, maybe for 6 months or a year since the Snowden revelations, but that is false. People have been waiting on Congress to stop the NSA for 4 decades. In 1975, almost 40 years ago, Senator Frank Church at his commission warned that the NSA, with its power at the time, could already enable a bad leader to impose total tyranny, and said that the NSA should be reined in. Well, here we are, nearly 40 years later. Congress has failed. If you were managing a business or had an employee that failed for 4 straight months, much less 4 decades, you wouldn't wait on them to somehow do the right thing by calling them over and over and saying, okay, it's time to do the right thing. So Congress will not, no matter what your hopes are, they will not stop violations of your natural right to privacy. And I guess we could get into property rights on that too, but that's probably a different discussion. They are not going to do it. So we're looking to take real serious action over at offnow.org. You can read about it at offnow.org/handbook. It's 24 pages of free PDF, or we've got the script doc embedded in the site on how you can actually work more locally and in your state to thwart the NSA, and, well, not just the NSA doing this kind of spying, but those federal agents that are violating your rights.
I like Water Wednesday. That's a beauty. Water Wednesday. In fact, the next time we talk about this, we'll do it on a Wednesday. Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay.
All right, now look, you've got a box here on page 2, a gray box, listing 6 different ways that the Off Now plan is going after the NSA, the National Security Agency. So I think it's important to go through them all. I mean, I've got you the whole show. Let's go through them all.
The first thing that we have to point out is that although the NSA is kind of the big bad guy, there is much more to mass surveillance than the NSA. We target primarily the NSA, but you cannot discount what's happening at the FBI. They're doing the exact same thing
right.
as the NSA.
Right. Surveillance in general. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's not just the NSA. It's just the NSA is so in your face, and I think institutions like the FBI seem so familiar to Americans. You know, they hardly notice their existence anymore, or that they might be involved in abuses. The NSA has become the poster child of the whole thing, but you're right. We shouldn't lose sight of abuses and problems all through the system. But let's go through point by point, and then I want to look at the proposed legislation that you'd like to see passed in some of the states. So we start off here with denying federal agencies engaged in warrantless surveillance the resources they need to operate. Is that just water?
Well, no, it's actually water, it's snow removal, it's trash, it's water treatment like sewage, it's electricity. In Texas, the massive new NSA data center that's coming online is actually probably bigger than the one in Utah that everyone knows about. And that one has electricity supplied by the independent Texas power grid. That's the reason, well, one of the main reasons, other than the fact that they're right down the road from a new Microsoft data center, that the NSA chose that location in San Antonio was to get Texas-provided electricity. Well, Texas doesn't need to give them that electricity. So we want to turn off whatever resources. The term that comes from the Patriot Act days, we're kind of flipping it on its head, is material support or resources. So basically anything that helps further and facilitate their actions, and we want to use that term as broadly as possible.
The second one is prohibiting the introduction of warrantless information collected by the feds and shared with state and local law enforcement in state criminal proceedings. To me, this is at least as creative as the shut off the water idea.
Well, something that people don't realize, and I think listeners of your show probably do, is that when the feds collect this information, they're just not sitting on it. They've got this treasure trove. They're wanting to use it. And one of the number one ways they use it is through the Drug Enforcement Agency. The good old drug war rears its ugly head again via an organization that used to be secretive called the Special Operations Division, or SOD. They take information from the NSA and other federal agencies like FBI, DHS, and even the United States Postal Service probably, and they pass this information along to state and local law enforcement, not for use in terrorism cases, but in use in everyday investigation. So the first step to pushing back on that is to tell the locals that they're not allowed to do this. Now, we know that they don't often follow the rules, but without at least taking that first step, it's never going to stop. And we recognize that this is an important part of the puzzle.
Now, I know in Utah there was at least a bill pending to do part of your point number 3, and I think it did actually pass, ending warrantless location tracking of cell phones and physical surveillance by drones. Didn't they get that cell phone thing passed in Utah?
They actually got point number 2 and 3 passed, and I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2 bills in a package, but in one of the bills, the data information passing along to the locals was also banned because there's a line item in the bill that says that the state or local agencies cannot obtain the information. So obtain in any way or access this information actually qualifies for the second point that we just covered. But Utah did also pass a bill that, and Connor Boyack has done some great work there with the Libertas Institute in pushing these privacy bills in the state of Utah to ban warrantless location tracking of your cell phone or electronic device, I believe is the technical term. And FBI is probably the most notorious for this, although the NSA has been tracking location of millions of people around the world and millions of Americans around the world every single day.
Number 4, ending cooperative partnerships between universities and the NSA. What do you envision there?
Well, we may have talked about this previously, Tom, and at the time there was 166 public universities around the country that had a certification known as a CAE, a Center for Academic Excellence. This is a partnership with the NSA. They do research, they advance capabilities. They're not actually, and some apologists for this program will say, oh, we're not really spying for the NSA, but they certainly are working with them to develop critical skills, and then it becomes a recruiting ground. There are now 171 since the last time. There's another 5 public universities around the country, and by passing the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, which we'll cover in just a moment here, this would ban the state from actually either continuing or starting new contracts between state agencies, including universities, and federal agencies like the NSA to further their spy programs.
Number 5 is penalizing corporations that cooperate with mass warrantless surveillance. What type of penalty do you envision?
Well, the penalty is really basically a choice, and that's the name of the legislation. It's called the Choice Act. We're basically, again, taking a page out of the Patriot Act and flipping it around on them. We'll go into the long name for this, but we're basically giving corporations a choice. If you're going to do business with the U.S. federal government, helping them further their surveillance programs, like, let's say, in a state like Georgia or Washington State or Hawaii, it isn't the state that is providing all the resources, maybe water, for example. There might be a private company that's doing it. Well, the state could still pass a law that says if you continue to do this, well, you're not going to have any contracts with the state of blank. So they're giving them an economic choice, and we like the idea of having economic impact for one's actions. And the Choice Act does that on corporations who help further federal spying programs.
And then finally, number 6 is aimed not so much at the federal level, but now looking at what can happen even on a local level that can be problematic from a civil liberties point of view, addressing state and local actions that feed into the larger surveillance states, such as fusion centers, suspicious activity reporting, surveillance cameras, and license plate readers.
Yeah, this is a very symbiotic relationship going back and forth. We talked about how the federal government passes this information along to the locals. Well, the locals, via these fusion centers, and they are in virtually every state of the country. In some states, there are multiple ones. There are these hubs funded by the federal government that are basically just data centers. They're the feds feed information into the fusion center, who passes it along to the locals, and the locals, through what are known as, and Los Angeles is one of the worst offenders of this, suspicious activity reports. The local police are basically taking people who might just be on vacation, taking a picture of a public building, and then all of a sudden they're generating a profile on them and passing that information along to the federal government. We also have license plate readers here in California, for example. My understanding is that even though they're not supposed to do it, they are actually keeping license plate scans for up to 30 years, and they're scanning them all on freeways all over the state, and they can actually put together a location profile based on where your license has been, and then they're feeding that into the fusion centers and making it available to the federal government. So these are very important things to address. We can't ignore the power of the local police, even though much of it is funded by the federal government. But it's back and forth. And if you're going to talk about privacy and stopping that surveillance, you have to look at it on every level possible.
Tell us what the anti-commandeering doctrine is, because the anti-commandeering doctrine is relevant to this issue of states resisting the federal government.
You know, it's rare, Tom, and I think you know this, that the Supreme Court ever agrees with one of our positions on something. And this is one of those very unique situations. Anti-commandeering was born out of something that James Madison, the guy that people call the father of the Constitution, he wrote in Federalist number 46 some advice on what you can do in your states when the federal government does one of two things. They either do what Madison called an unwarrantable act, that means something that's unconstitutional, or merely unpopular, something that was constitutional. So sometimes the federal government does stuff they're authorized to do, right? And they really shouldn't be doing that either. We don't like it. We don't want them to do it. So Madison said there were a number of ways to do that, and one of the ones that we focus on, and out of the 4 primary ones, is a, quote, refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. In other words, just don't participate with the federal government in the enforcement or the enactment of their federal acts or their programs that we don't want to have happen. And Madison said that if this happened in a number of states at the same time, it would basically make those federal acts very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. Now, the Supreme Court has actually backed this up in a series of court cases going all the way back to 1842, and then most recently in 2012, the Affordable Care Act decision, basically saying states are not required to provide, use resources or provide manpower to help the federal government carry out its acts, regulatory programs, laws, regulations, etc. And this goes all the way back. The 1842 case we think is extremely fascinating. It's the Prigg case. It basically said that northern states didn't have to help the federal government carry out the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. So that's a very powerful narrative, and it has actually been very successful in response. Those northern states were very successful in refusing to participate with the federal government and rendering that Fugitive Slave Act almost impossible to enforce. So we're using that legal narrative to say states don't have to participate. They don't have to provide a voluntary contract for water or resources. They don't have to take that information that's handed to them. They don't have to start randomly sharing with them additional information. And while we know states are really bad governments too, it's possible on a more local level to actually get them to do the right thing from time to time.
Right now I want to talk about some of the legislation that you're proposing. And you're proposing it, for example, this Fourth Amendment Protection Act, not just for the 9 states in which we happen to know that NSA facilities are present, but also in the other 41 states. Now, why is that?
Well, first of all, we never know what the NSA is really doing. We know for sure there are 9 states that have physical NSA facilities. Of course, Maryland, then there's Utah, Texas, there's West Virginia, Tennessee, Hawaii, Georgia, Washington State, Colorado. We know they have these locations. But what we don't know is where are they planning locations for 2020? Where are they already working behind the scenes to make a contract with another state or another local public official? Because this stuff never comes out until the deed is already done. So first of all, it's essential to pass this legislation saying we're not going to provide you resources, we're not going to partner with you in the states that already have the facilities. But it may actually be even more important if we're talking about stemming the tide and then being able to push back, is stopping their expansion. There is no indication that the NSA is not trying to expand further. They've been aggressively on this path since 2003, if not earlier. It took them nearly 10 years to get to the point where they were able to get Utah up and running, and it's not even doing a great job. But it's very likely, and it's my instinct just from reading the documents and the contracts that they've signed behind the scenes over the years, that it's very likely they're setting up other locations. If they set up, for example, in San Antonio because they wanted to be near a brand new Microsoft data center within miles, what reason do we have to think that they're not building another facility in California right in Silicon Valley or working to get that done? So it's essential to stem the tide, to have this legislation passed around the country. And then if we really get the thing done, let's say in Utah, we get a bill passed where Mark Roberts has introduced legislation in 2014 and should be reintroducing for January, and Connor Boyack is working to get that bill passed. They don't have the excuse of saying, well, you shouldn't do this because if you really did get lucky and get it passed, they'll just move next door to Nevada. Well, Nevada should also pass it. We want to box them in, give them no breathing room, and eventually shut them down.
We're talking about a handbook that listeners can access for free at offnow.org/handbook. It's called Off Now: How Your State Can Help Support the Fourth Amendment. So offnow.org/handbook is how you can read this free 24-page report. All right, let's talk about the Fourth Amendment Protection Act. What does this do?
So this is the bill that we're basically talking about right here. It bans the state from providing material support or resources. This is a phrase taken directly out of so-called anti-terror federal law. It's a very broad term or phrase that says you really are not going to be able to take any actions that help further in any way, secondary or tertiary way, that help the federal government carry out and facilitate their spy programs. The most notable one, and we've talked about this on this show, Tom, is the Utah water situation where they need somewhere up to 1.5, 1.7, 1.2 million gallons of water to cool their supercomputers to store all the information on you, me, and everybody else in the world. And without that water provided by a political subdivision of the state of Utah, they can't keep that facility on.
Now, when we go through, we look at the rest of the legislation, you've got here specific bills dealing with some of the specific ideas that we went through in that gray box, the 6 things. They're instantiated in various individual pieces of legislation, and you're saying in this handbook that you can mix and match these as seems appropriate according to the political culture of your state. Whatever you think is going to work, whatever combination of these things is likely to work, or just introducing them singly and building up, whatever works, go ahead and do it. Now, what kind of progress have you guys seen so far? It seems to me you guys are doing this. I mean, I know you have partners. I know there are a bunch of different organizations that are involved in Off Now, but this was your idea. This was Mike Meharry's idea. And you guys are up against the whole world. You're up against the whole world. For example, before we get into this progress thing, let me ask you, how much assistance have you gotten in promoting these ideas, let's say from the Heritage Foundation? A whole lot? Are they giving you a lot of money or support, or where's that coming from?
Actually, the Heritage Foundation attacked us and put out a paper that said, in essence, states are required to help the federal government carry out their spy program.
And isn't that funny? The Heritage Foundation spends all its time lecturing us to obey the Supreme Court, and now the Supreme Court, for once, does something right, and now they don't want to listen to the Supreme Court.
In this situation, no, the Supreme Court doesn't count, and states are not allowed to do this. They are not allowed to interfere. Of course, the fear-mongering comes from, quote, national security. Because of national security, now they can't do anything. Well, the fact of the matter is these are voluntary agreements. The federal government goes to the state and says, hey, do this. Obviously, there's some financial coercion going, but the state could say no, and we have documented examples of how a state has said no, they've done this, and they've won.
But surely you've been featured on Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, all these people who are deeply, deeply concerned about these issues. Mark Levin, I'm sure they've all had you on their program so that you can promote this idea and really get a lot of energy behind it, right?
Well, when it comes to the establishment, there's no one on the left or the right that is interested in this. They are freaked out. There are some organizations that are more on the liberal side of the spectrum that we've worked with on the other parts of our program, that they're very supportive, and their grassroots organizers tell us, we even like this resources idea because the end goal, even though we approach it from a different way, we like the idea that we're working to get to the same end game. But our lawyers are, quote, freaked out about it. The lawyers hate this stuff.
Of course.
And you know what that tells me? That tells me we are 150% correct, because if the lawyers are freaked out about it, we should be doing it. It's a huge green light, and we're going to push harder and harder every week until we get it done.
And, what do lawyers learn in law school about the states anyway, other than they're just doormats? They don't learn that the states have any constitutional role, have any role whatsoever. So, of course, this makes their heads explode, but that's a good thing, because we need to have conversations that law schools leave out. We need to talk about these things because everything else has been a failure. As we wrap up here... Yeah, go ahead.
In almost every situation that I brought this up to one of these constitutional attorneys, Tom, they said, anti-commandeering, is that something that I forgot from law school?
Yeah, well, you don't say. Now, who are some of the other organizations that are part of Off Now? It's not just the 10th Amendment Center.
No. And we work with a nice coalition of organizations who signed on support. I've mentioned Connor Boyack's Libertas Institute. We've also got support from Occupy in Eugene, Oregon. We're working with Downsize DC, Jim Babka's organization, antiwar.com. Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which is a very progressive civil libertarian organization. A number of groups, including Revolution Truth. This was the organization that was part of the lawsuit against NDAA, featuring people like Noam Chomsky, for example. So it's a broad coalition of smaller grassroots organizations, and we intend to make it a little bit larger.
I want to point out that, of course, when you are on this show most of the time, we're talking about the 10th Amendment Center specifically and the specific work of the 10th Amendment Center, but the fact is this really is a brainchild. I mean, the 10th Amendment Center is the mover and the shaker behind this particular initiative, offnow.org, and I do want the audience to know that I put my money where my mouth is. I'm telling you guys, you got to support the 10th Amendment Center because they're doing things that nobody else is doing. They're just on the front lines of so many important activities that no one else would be carrying out in their absence. So you got to support them, and they operate on a shoestring. And think of what they could do if they had a little bit more than a shoestring. 10thamendmentcenter.com is where to do that. I send them I think fairly substantial check every month, which I just started a couple months ago. I realized it's not enough to promote them on the show. I'm going to send them some dough. I'm doing it. You should do it as well. Michael Bolden, thanks for being here today.
Tom, thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful for all the support and kind words.
All right, everybody, it is a crazy week for me this week because next week begins another academic year for the Ron Paul Homeschool program at ronpaulhomeschool.com. And the course I'm going to be doing for the fall there is Western Civilization from 1493. So I've got to have 10 to 15 videos up by early next week, so it is a nutty week. But check that out at ronpaulhomeschool.com. I've already got Western Civ, the first part, 180 videos up. I've got my government course, Government 1B, that's 90 videos and audio files, by the way, if you prefer that. Those are both up at ronpaulhomeschool.com. By the end of next week, you should be able to order those 2 complete courses directly from me. I'll give you details on that as soon as they are available. But this Western Civ from 1493, I'm going to be doing as the students are doing it. I'll be a few weeks ahead of them until it's all finished. And then when it's all finished, I'll make that one available separately from the Ron Paul program with their permission, of course. So that's ronpaulhomeschool.com. That's taking up a lot of my time in this week here. Don't forget, you can learn the history and economics they didn't teach you over at mylibertyclassroom.com in courses you can learn from in your car, taught by people you can trust, like me. And you can do it with 50% off with coupon code DISCOUNT in all caps. Make sure and check out the 10th Amendment Center and support them, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for yet another episode of The Tom Woods Show. Thanks so much for your support and for spreading the word.
The Tom Woods Show.